Story 1. This only happened a couple of hours ago at around 9 in the evening. I had a crazy craving for Brack's conversation hearts. You know, those little candy hearts that taste like chalk and nobody seems to like. Well, I'm that odd person who actually does. After visiting 4 different stores, I had almost given up until I made one last attempt to go to Walmart, even though I really dislike shopping there. I did have some other items to pick up, but I told myself I wouldn't grab a cart until I had those candy hearts in my hand. I managed to find an employee who was really nice and showed me exactly where they were. I grabbed 5 bags because I'm a total sugar lover and then headed off to get a cart so I could finish my shopping. After grabbing the cart, I started picking up a few things like you naturally do in Walmart. Before I left home, my mother had asked me to get her some cookies, so I was standing by the bakery taking pictures of different kinds and sending them to her. Whenever I shop, I always grab items from the back of the shelf because, in my mind, fewer people have touched those. While doing that, I even try to tidy up the table a little so it looks nice for the next person. My cart was parked next to the butter section. This Walmart is really weird and small, and I was looking down at my phone, jotting down what else I needed to get. No more than 5 seconds passed before I heard a loud, "Excuse me," echo behind me. I didn't look up at first because I assumed it wasn't directed at me. When I heard it again, I started to feel uneasy, but still kept my head down, pretending to be invisible. The third time, what followed that sharp voice was a hard shove of my cart straight into my stomach. "Crazy lady. Finally, you look up. I need help finding something, and if you'd stop looking down at your phone so much, maybe you'd actually do your job." Me. "Look, I don't work here, ma'am." I literally said the name of the online group to her. "Crazy lady? Yes, you do. Don't lie." I cut her off at that point. Me. "Look, I'm wearing a shirt with 2 disco balls on it. Do you see any employees around here wearing disco shirts? Do you?" Crazy lady. "Well, you were just stocking that table there. Why else would you be cleaning it up?" Me. "Maybe I did that because I'm a decent person." By that point, the same friendly employee who had helped me find the candy earlier came over and asked what was going on. Before I could answer, she started telling him how lazy I was and that I should be fired. The employee calmly told her again that I didn't work there. After hearing this, the woman swung her hand as if she was going to knock down all of the butter on the shelf, but instead, she hit her hand right on the metal shelf itself. Her loud cry of pain nearly made my eardrums ring. I stepped back, and so did the employee, both of us unsure what to do next. The noise drew the attention of other shoppers, who all turned to look. She clutched her hand and bent over, shouting, "She did this to me," over and over. The security guard from the front of the store came over and, to my surprise, didn't seem sympathetic at all. He told her that since she had been disruptive to other customers and had intentionally tried to damage store property, she could either leave willingly or be escorted out. While she was walking toward the exit, she continued yelling and calling all 3 of us every name she could think of. She kept insisting that I be fired and even threatened to call the corporate office. After things settled down, the store apologized to me and even offered me a discount, which was a kind gesture, but I declined. I was just so relieved that the whole ordeal was finally over. It honestly felt like a bad dream. Now, I'm home in bed, typing this out while eating my candy hearts and still shaking my head over how ridiculous the entire situation was. Story 2. On April 10, 2021, at around 5 p.m., I had an unforgettable encounter with a real-life Karen. I work at a department store, though I'd rather not name which one, since I don't want to risk getting in trouble. I've been employed there for about 7 years, working in several departments, but my main post is in the men's department. That day was particularly stressful. Since the pandemic began, we've been working with a limited number of staff, which means we've had to do a lot more than usual, like just about every workplace these days, I suppose. I've been working extra hours, feeling exhausted and overwhelmed. The store has been incredibly busy, and with so few employees, we haven't been able to keep it tidy. It looked like a complete mess, and honestly, I was both upset and mentally drained. But this story isn't about me, it's about her. I'll try to recall every detail, though my memory isn't the best, probably because I tend to repress unpleasant experiences. So, this woman comes in with curly, dirty blonde hair, accompanied by her 2 sons, or maybe just one. I could have sworn there were 2 at one point. She walks up to me and asks sharply, "Do you have any boys' fitting rooms open?" I told her that the men's fitting rooms were open, just to the left. Normally, we have 2 fitting room areas, but since the pandemic, we're only allowed to keep one open. The only other fitting room available is in the women's casual section. Judging by her tone, she was clearly frustrated that she couldn't find one sooner. Maybe no one had told her which fitting rooms were open, but since we're so short-staffed, it's possible she simply couldn't find anyone to ask. I think I heard her son quietly tell her to calm down, probably embarrassed by her attitude. Right then, I had a feeling she was going to be difficult, and unfortunately, I was right. Just a few minutes later, she came back, this time approaching me and my manager. "So, are all these fitting rooms closed because of the pandemic or something?" she asked. I was about to answer, but my manager jumped in first. I probably should have let him handle it from the start. He explained that only 2 fitting room areas were open at the moment, and that it used to be even fewer. In the past, only 3 out of 5 rooms in that section were available, but now all of them were open. Her response? "Well, that's not going to be good for your business." That comment stuck with me. It really irritated me because it felt like she was intentionally trying to upset us, like she was wishing bad luck on the store just because she didn't get her way. She went on complaining about how inconvenient it was that she couldn't shop while her son was trying on clothes. Thing is, the boys' section is downstairs where the women's casual fitting room is located, so she easily could have done her shopping there. Maybe she didn't want to embarrass her son by making him use the women's area. But honestly, plenty of women use the men's fitting rooms without issue. She just kept going on about it, clearly trying to make a scene. I finally told her, "That's just the way it is," because I was running out of patience. I was doing my best to stay professional, but she was really testing my nerves. We're doing the best we can with limited staff and hours due to the pandemic. But she either didn't care or just refused to understand the situation. It really frustrates me when people can't take a moment to think about why certain rules are in place. I tried to stay polite and asked if there was anything else she needed. She just smirked and said, "You could open up the kids' fitting room," as if it were a joke. Tasteless. I take my job seriously, maybe too seriously sometimes. So when customers make snide comments like that, it genuinely hurts. I couldn't help but wonder if something had upset her before she even walked into the store. Story 3. I've been into photography for about 3 years now, ever since my dad bought me my first decent camera for my birthday. What started as just a hobby quickly became something I was really passionate about. My dad got interested too, and it became this thing we do together on weekends. Last year, we attended our first photography workshop with these 2 really talented photographers who teach people how to capture landscapes. We learned so much that weekend that we stayed in touch with them and signed up for their next workshop as soon as they announced it. So this past weekend, my dad and I drove up to join another workshop with them. There were 10 of us total, including the 2 photographers leading the group. Most of us had been to the previous workshop, so we already knew each other and got along really well. The plan was 3 full days of hiking different mountains and taking pictures of the scenery. I was really looking forward to it because the weather forecast looked perfect and the fall colors were supposed to be at their peak. We started early Saturday morning at the base of this beautiful mountain known for its stunning views. The air was crisp and cool, and everyone was excited to get started. We hiked up for about an hour until we reached this clearing where one of the photographers, who I'll call John, wanted to teach us about lighting and composition. John has this naturally loud voice, you know the type, but he wasn't shouting or anything. In fact, I noticed he was trying to keep his voice down because we were in nature, and he's always been respectful about that. We were all gathered around him, maybe spread out in a semicircle, quietly listening to what he was explaining about how to frame our shots. Some of us were crouched down looking at our cameras, others were standing. It was peaceful and calm. Nobody was making any noise except John talking. Then out of nowhere, this woman came stomping over to our group. She had this angry look on her face and her hands were on her hips. She told us that we were talking too loudly. John stopped mid-sentence and looked surprised. He apologized right away, saying he was sorry. But the woman wasn't done. She told him to talk lower and went on to say that our group in particular was very loud. She compared the mountain to a cathedral and complained that we had just scared away 2 deer she was trying to photograph. I looked around at my dad and the others. We were all confused because we hadn't been loud at all. Most of us had been quietly taking pictures on our own for the past hour, occasionally showing each other what we'd captured. Nobody had yelled or shouted. We'd all been super respectful of the environment and other hikers. John told her that if she wanted him to lower his voice, that was fine, but she shouldn't lecture him about how to behave when he'd been doing this for years. He pointed out that this wasn't a cathedral, it was a mountain, and there were other people around. Of course people were going to talk. He said that a simple polite request to lower his voice would have been enough. The woman's face turned red, and she opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. She just huffed loudly and stomped away back toward the trail. We all kind of looked at each other with raised eyebrows. My dad shook his head about some people just looking for reasons to be upset. We tried to get back into the lesson, but the mood had definitely shifted. John seemed a bit thrown off, and we all felt awkward. After he finished explaining what he wanted to teach us, we spread out again to practice the techniques. About 30 minutes later, we regrouped to discuss where we wanted to go next. We were standing there talking about whether to head to the eastern ridge or stay where we were when we heard loud voices nearby. A group of elderly hikers had gathered not too far from us, and they were practically shouting to each other about directions to some scenic overlook. Their voices were echoing across the mountain, way louder than our group had ever been. I spotted Karen not too far away, setting up her camera on a tripod. She was within earshot of these loud hikers, but wasn't saying anything to them. The hypocrisy was just too much for me. I walked over toward her, not to confront her really, just feeling frustrated. When I got closer, I said loud enough for her to hear that those people were being so loud. I added sarcastically that I guessed the cathedral rules didn't apply to everyone, and that it must be nice to pick and choose who you lecture. Karen spun around and glared at me. She demanded to know what I had just said to her. I told her she heard me. I pointed out that she had complained about our group when we were barely talking, but those people over there were yelling, and she wasn't saying anything to them. She called me an entitled little brat and asked how I dared to speak to her that way. She started walking toward me really fast, and before I knew what was happening, she raised her hand and tried to slap me across the face. I stepped back quickly, and her hand just barely missed me. My dad saw what happened and rushed over right away, putting himself between us. My dad asked her what was wrong with her and if she had just tried to hit his daughter. By this point, other people from our group had noticed what was going on and came over. The elderly hikers had stopped talking and were watching too. Karen was still looking angry and looked like she might try again. I said that I was calling the police. I pulled out my phone and dialed. Karen's expression changed from angry to shocked. She said I was overreacting and that she had barely touched me. I told her she had tried to slap me and that everyone there had seen it. The dispatcher answered and I explained what had happened, giving our location on the mountain. They said they'd send someone up. It took about 20 minutes for 2 park rangers to arrive since we were pretty far up the trail. During that time, Karen kept trying to leave, but my dad and John blocked her path and told her she needed to stay until the authorities arrived. When the rangers got there, I explained everything that happened. Several people from my group backed up my story, confirming that Karen had tried to slap me. One of the elderly hikers even came over and said she'd witnessed the whole thing. The Rangers took statements from everyone and talked to Karen separately. She kept insisting that I'd provoked her and that she was just defending herself, but the witnesses all contradicted her story. I told the Rangers I wanted to press charges. The Rangers nodded and said they'd file a report for assault. Karen started crying and saying she was sorry, that she'd just been having a bad day, but I didn't care. You don't get to assault people because you're having a bad day. The Rangers escorted her down the mountain and told us we'd be contacted about next steps. After they left, our group stood there for a moment in silence. Then John cleared his throat and asked if we should get back to photography. Everyone laughed, and just like that, the tension broke. We spent the rest of the weekend taking amazing pictures, and honestly, it turned out to be a great trip despite the drama. My dad was proud of how I handled myself. Story 4. So, as a freshly certified systems administrator, I landed up my apprenticeships at a pretty alright shop at the time. Everything went fine through the apprenticeships, until the last few months, where every other apprentice or employee left without any kind of renewal, leaving me with a whole shop's worth of hardware to replace, diagnose, and repair, and even more software to touch up and install for our clients. Once it was finished, I suggested that, since they were not going to find more people to work during the summer, and everything took a hit after the workforce went from 6 people to 1, they should contract me. This, of course, did not happen, but they offered me to do the occasional odd job. Accepting that was the worst decision I ever made. A few weeks after I finished my apprenticeship was finished, I was called back to the shop to clear their backlog, with machines I even started repairing, but could not finish as I finished with the apprenticeship. For 4 days of working from 0900 to 2030, I just got €80 out of it. Of course, this did not sit well with me, but I did it because I needed the cash. Fast forward several months, and things have gotten to the point I am removing ransomware out of entire business and setting up NAS-Ease for free. Not a petty €20 per day, literally free, because I decided to get a small computer to complement my Pi, one of these 80-year garbage Cherry Trail machines, a few weeks before. Between the 2 businesses that I consulted and fixed, the amount my bosses gained was nearing €2,000. I, of course, saw none of that. And that's the day I decided to quit from doing odd jobs for these people. Nearly 3 months afterwards, I was called to look up into a Mac, as I was their Apple computer expert. And to be fair, I was single-handedly working on those things and putting back on working order like hotcakes, unless precision soldering was required. The gist of it: someone stole the laptop and they wanted me to decrypt the proprietary NVMe drive to, in theory, just install OS X over. But I was thinking there might have been ulterior motives. Anyhow, being angry as I was, I just pulled the hash of the key on a locked device. Press Shift plus Control plus Option plus Command plus S to get the password hash that Apple stores would use to figure out the keys, and gave them to them, telling them to just find a Russian hacker and get that cracked. I was not going to do anything illegal. My bosses were clearly displeased, so they decided that since I was not going to spend a whole day trying to get schematics in a convoluted solution involving another modern Mac, something I requested them to add for making my life much easier while repairing them, they decided that, well, I could have a go to the hard drive piles they had left for data recovery. In their words, they told me, since you don't want to work on that Mac, we want you to recover all of this data for us. And so I did. Once one of the bosses went to visit his girlfriend on work hours, and the other stepped for a smoke, I grabbed 4 1-terabyte hard drives from the new stockpile, plugged both of them on soft RAID 0, 2 in each of the servicing computers, spread all the data recovery disks I could across internal and external hard drive adapters, totaling 9 disks, and set off both Photorec and Testis to run through every single disk, and dump the contents on the new hard drives, effectively making the servicing machines, which were needed for anything software-related, useless. They wanted me to clear off their entire data recovery backlog, and I did so. Once the jobs began, I picked up my things and left the building, locking the door, which would mean that my boss who was smoking would need to wait or call for the other owner who was with their girlfriend to let them back in. I got a bunch of angry voicemails for a few days before stopping. My best guess is that they actually tried to keep the data recovery jobs up for that long, while completely halting the rest of their business until they decided to pull the plug on drives that arguably would not stand being worked that hard, then removed like that. I have not heard from them since, so I am assuming my free data recovery service was pretty exceptional. Story 5. Background. This story took place during my freshman year of college, the first time in the mid-70s, thanks to my grades in high school, scores on my ACT test, and EQ. Don't ask me what it is, as I still don't know. The college I wanted to attend sent a special enrollment package prior to graduation to help me sign up for my first semester's classes. Among those classes offered was an Honors Chemistry 101 course that had classes every weekday. I had also enrolled in an Honors College Algebra 101 course as well, but nothing too weird happened in that. The lectures for the 40 to 50 students attending the chemistry class took place on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and the labs on the other 2 weekdays. No, I wasn't the only girl in this course, but there were only a few. We were split up into several smaller lab groups. The lab was a pretty typical student setup, 4 workstations per table, with each of us having our own dedicated drawer that locked. We were issued keys to store our own beakers, test tubes, and so forth. We each paid fees for rental of that equipment, the majority of which would be refunded to us at the end of the course, assuming everything was turned in clean and with no damage. I did notice I was the only girl in our lab group as I stood in various lines to collect all my gear and stuff needed for the start of class and that day's experiment. Finally getting back to my workstation with my arms filled with stuff. About 20 minutes after the class had started, I was setting everything out that was needed and putting the extra glassware away in my drawer. An entitled male student standing on the opposite side of my workstation made some sort of mistake with what he was doing as the test tube he had been heating shattered. He cursed rather loudly, noticing the flying glass had left small cuts on his one hand. The 3 of us assigned to the workstations around him, myself and 2 other students, had all stopped what we were doing to see if we needed to render aid. He looked directly at me, gesturing at the mess on his worktop, saying, "Get this cleaned up. I'll be back after I get my hand checked and some fresh ingredients." Then he walked out the door, heading, I assumed, for the aid station located down the hall. I looked at the other 2 students and said, "Does he seriously think I'm supposed to clean up after him?" They both nodded and one said, "I wouldn't. We've only got an hour and a half lab time left, and you need at least an hour to do this right." Okay then. I grabbed one of the steel garbage cans for disposal of broken glass, hand broom, regular broom, dustpan, and making sure I had my safety gear on, gloves and safety glasses, I quickly swept all glass on his worktop into the can, broken or not. Then I noticed he had left his storage drawer open with the rest of his $200. Remember, these are 1974 prices glassware. Those also went into the can. Anything that didn't break on its own, I shattered with the aid of the broomstick. Unfortunately, he walked back into the room before I had finished the job. Gone maybe 10 minutes. He went directly into full screaming mode. "What the heck are you doing, you klutzy witch?" Not the actual words, but you get the idea. The other students grabbed him to keep him from reaching me, and the professor and a cool female assistant professor quickly showed up. She said, "My office is closer. Move now." Needless to say, her office wasn't very big without enough seats for all of us. She started with the 2 students, asking them to explain what had happened. They did. She glanced over at the professor, who made a hand motion of handing it back to her. She thanked them for their statements, and while eyeing the jerk, she said he'd be good now that he's had some time to cool off, and that the 2 students could leave. They did so. She now turned to the jerk with, "Did you ask her to clean up your mess?" "Yes, that's why she's there, right?" The assistant professor blinked a bit at that, glancing over at the professor, who was starting to smile. Very gently, she asked, "Can you explain what you mean by that?" Well, it's obvious, right? She's a girl and blonde to boot. Girls don't take honors chemistry. They're stupid. She's there to clean up after us, right? The professor by this time is trying very hard not to laugh, and I can see the assistant professor having composure trouble too. She turned to me finally and asked me what happened. Me, deciding to go for broke, did my best imitation of a breathless Marilyn Monroe. Oh, I'm so sorry, I was trying to help him, but I'm such a klutz. Everything I touched broke. The professor put his head down on the desk laughing. The assistant professor gave him a nudge, but he just waved his hands and pointed back at her. She smiled at me and then turned to him. Just so you know, she is a fellow student, nor do we hire maids for our labs. Students are expected to clean up after themselves. In regards to this incident, however, you've admitted you had ordered her clean up your mess. She did not have to do this, but did so in an effort to be helpful. Responsibility for the cost of the broken glassware lies with you and not her. Considering your attitude towards women, I think it best you be transferred to another lab section, one without women as well. He then sputters, but she was breaking everything with the broomstick. Me, still breathless. I was dumping everything into the can so fast because I hadn't started my experiment, yet I was afraid I might have accidentally dropped in some good glass. Eyelashes flutter in the direction of the professor. Keeping in mind your safety lecture in class, I thought to use the broom handle to move the broken bits around without cutting myself. Everything was broken though. Fresh spurt of laughter from the professor as the assistant professor started coughing to cover laughter too. She stood, handed him a slip of paper, and gestured him to the door with, "Bring your receipt for payment back to the lab office tomorrow, and we'll get you squared away." He left muttering under his breath. The professor finally spoke to me and asked, "If you don't mind my asking, what are you majoring in?" I sighed and said in my normal voice, "I haven't made my mind up yet. Right now I'm down with a double major in chemistry and math, with a double minor in art and theater." Why? More laughter from both of them now. The assistant professor said, "What are you planning on taking for your philosophy requirement?" I said, "That will be next semester, but why do you ask?" The professor started laughing yet again as the assistant professor said, "You've got to take Professor X's logic course. He shares this entitled guy's viewpoint on women." I did my best Spock eyebrow lift, not bad even if it is me saying it as I'd practiced it in a mirror for hours. I'll look into it, and thanks for the suggestion. That, dear reader, is a story for another day. Part 2: Girls do not understand logic. Here is my second story from my years of attending college, the first time, 1970s, this time involving a logic course. Background: everyone obtaining a degree from this school was obliged to take a philosophy course. The three options that had no prerequisites were as follows: History of Religions, Overview of Major World Religions, Philosophy 101, Focus on Plato and Aristotle, and Logic. Having spent the first 8 years attending a Catholic school, I felt I'd had more than my share on world religions and Greek philosophers. Not knowing much about logic other than it being a favorite of Spock on Star Trek. Oh, how I wanted a computer like the one on the show. It was clearly the most interesting. For those unaware of what logic is, Wikipedia defines it as the systematic study of the forms of inference, the relations that lead to the acceptance of one proposition, the conclusion on the basis of a set of other propositions, the premises. More broadly, logic is the analysis and appraisal of arguments. The premises may or may not support the conclusion. When they do not, the relation is characterized as a fallacy. Put another way, you start with a series of statements that must first be evaluated as being truthful or not. Assuming they are, the statements themselves are then examined to see if they link together to lead one to the proposed conclusion. Another key point to keep in mind at all times, if you do intend to think in a logical manner, is the willingness to change an opinion or belief, no matter how dear, based upon new information or evidence. This was the most troubling aspect of logical thinking for everyone in my class, including myself. During the course, the professor certainly challenged us, as the majority of our assignments was an analysis of popular beliefs. No, I won't share those here as most would find them highly controversial. Not all of the proposed conclusions within those assignments held up. But, oh boy, did you ever have to work and think to accomplish that. Also, I'd like to say how much I enjoyed the course, and how useful I still find that training even today. Okay, moving on to the story, which begins on our first day of class. The professor comes in and says, "Greetings everyone, I'm Professor X. I see I have 2 female students," nodding his head in Selena's and my directions. In my experience, girls do quite poorly in my class, as they are incapable of logical reasoning. He then proceeded to give us a quick overview of logic, as I've outlined above, giving a special emphasis to the part about a willingness to change your belief. Looking at the two of us as he said this, I'd had enough of his condescending attitude and looked over at S and raised my eyebrows to her as if to say, "Do we do this?" She gave me back a very warm smile and showed me the margin of her notepad where she jotted down the words, "Oh, it's on." We were seated next to each other, by the way. He had stated in class that he preferred students not to band together into study groups, as this usually meant everyone making the same mistakes. Comparing assignments after having been graded, however, was the way we could learn from our mistakes. Not that everyone did so, but Selena and I did so on a routine basis. Surprisingly, we got almost identical grades while making quite differently worded analysis. Another habit of this professor was, when returning assignments, was to announce the student's name and their grade to everyone. He would usually start with whomever had gotten the lowest grade, working his way up to whomever had gotten the highest. When he did this the first time, he also shamed some students by pointing out how the wording they had used in their arguments was almost identical. Last item of note regarding written finals for courses at this college. We were required to buy a special blue-covered mini notebook or composition book at the campus bookstore. The only things allowed on our desks, prior to the distribution of the test itself, were some sharpened pencils and an erasure. The last day of our class with this professor was him returning our test booklets to each of us. On the cover of each he had written out our grade for that test, a summary of our other grades ending with what our final grade for the course would be. He used that final grade to dictate how the tests were returned and was very happy that none of us had failed, with the lowest grade being a C. When he got to the A, smiling broadly, he handed Selena her booklet and congratulated her. He then turned to me, handing me mine, saying, "Congratulations for the first A a lady has ever received." Continuing to smile broadly, he started to clap for us, encouraging the others to join in. Selena and I were very embarrassed, but had to stand up taking a bow. 2 other guys did get A's as well, and everyone clapped for them too. The professor took center stage again, thanking us all for being such an excellent group of students. He reminded us again that the primary responsibility of thinking logically was the willingness to change an opinion based upon new information or evidence. Waving his hand towards Selena and I, he said, "Clearly I need to adjust my opinion about women taking my course. Thank you, ladies, and I hope my future students will do as well."